What is up, YouTube family? Welcome back to part 18 of my deep dive series into the Benoit investigations. In this video, we're going to take a look at the interview with the pastor, and we'll also take a little bit of a look at the Wikipedia mystery, because from the end of this video, the next video will be about the interrogation of Matthew Greenberg. And this is probably a good place to remind you that this is part of a series. So each video builds on information from previous videos. So if you're just tuning in for this one, you might be a bit lost. So I suggest you stop now and at least go back to parts 16 and 17 and watch those first to get the best experience from this particular video. And it wouldn't be a YouTube video without me saying don't forget to like and subscribe and share this with anyone you think might be interested. And if you like what you see and you would like to contribute to my channel, you will find a link in the description box below to my Cash App, followed by a link to a very brief video with simple instructions for how to donate. Even just a few dollars goes a long way and would be infinitely appreciated. Those of you who have been making regular contributions, thank you so much. I couldn't be doing this without you. And for my future contributors, thank you in advance. You rock. With all of that out of the way, let's just get right to the video. And so we move straight from the desktop computer findings to the Pastor Dillard interview. So let's see what we can learn by reading this. It says that shortly after learning of the internet history and the viewing of the Elijah webpage, I was told of a television interview, and I, as Detective Harper, was told of a television interview done by two friends of Chris Benoit. The interview was on July 4th, 2007, on Atlanta's Fox 5 News by reporter Doug Evans. The interview was with a friend of the Benoit family named James Robertson and Pastor George Dillard. Now, if police interviewed this James Robertson, there's no mention of it in these documents. Pastor Dillard is the presiding pastor at the Peachtree City Christian Church and had been providing Chris and Nancy Benoit spiritual guidance. So I know that there were some people who were commenting on previous videos that Chris Benoit was a religious nut and that's why the Bibles were placed by the bodies. If any of you are watching, here you'll get some insight into whether or not any of them were religious nuts. Also, I just think it's interesting that the way this is worded, it makes it sound like police became aware of these two individuals from this television interview, that somebody told this Detective Harper, because it says right here, I was told of a television interview done by two friends of Chris Benoit. How thorough were these police if they're hearing through the grapevine about interviews that Benoit's friends are giving to television personalities? That just seems off to me. I would think that they would want to make sure that they would get statements from these people first before they would be doing interviews with outside sources. I don't know. So then on July 5th, 2007, Detective Harper met with Pastor Dillard at his home to speak about Chris and Nancy Benoit. Pastor Dillard advised that Nancy came to him looking for some spiritual guidance, and Chris joined them for several conversations. Pastor Dillard stated both Chris and Nancy struggled with their faith, but Nancy had become really comfortable in her beliefs. Pastor Dillard stated that Chris seemed somewhat skeptical on the subject of religion and needed a little more time. Okay? Pastor Dillard advised that there was nothing in the conversations with Chris and Nancy Benoit that would have made him think for a second that the recent events would have occurred in their home. So, there again, like I've stated in previous videos, it seems like every place the police look for a motive, what they hear is people telling them that they never had any indication that anything like this would happen. This goes on to say that using the information from the internet history about the Elijah searches, Detective Harper asked Pastor Dillard if there were any spiritual or biblical reference to the prophet Elijah that would be of interest in my investigation of the Benoit deaths. Now, we already went through the Elijah Wikipedia, or at least just a portion of it, in, I believe, part 17 of my videos. So if you watched that video, then you're aware that it was quite an extensive Wikipedia article. And out of all of that information about the prophet Elijah, let's see what the pastor thought would be relevant to tell the police. Pastor Dillard advised that in the first book of Kings in the Bible, chapter 17, whoa, it just occurred to me that my video about Elijah was episode number 17, and it was the chapter 17 book of, wow, I did not do that deliberately. Whoa. But anyway, Pastor Dillard says that in the first book of Kings in the Bible, chapter 17, Elijah is sent to a widow. Pastor Dillard continued saying that the son of the widow dies, and Elijah takes the child from his mother and stretches out on him 3 times in his own bed. I'm not sure what that wording means. That sounds really disturbing. Pastor Dillard then stated that Elijah pleads to God to restore the boy's soul to his body, which he does, and Elijah then returns the boy to the widow. And these actions by Elijah give the widow faith in God. And I think what's really important is how Detective Harper worded that last sentence there in his report. The actions by Elijah give the widow faith in God. So I don't know how it got twisted that people think that Benoit somehow twistedly believed that if God would restore life to the child, that would prove to Benoit that God existed, or however messed up that got. I mean, that just spun off the deep end. But one way that could make sense is if Nancy were still alive when Daniel had passed. And then you could look at it that way, as Benoit being Elijah, pleading out to God to restore life to the child, because that would restore faith to the widow, being Nancy. But in my opinion here, the pastor is leading the investigation by cherry-picking this particular piece of the story. And there is so much more to the story of Elijah than just resurrecting this child. So is there any evidence that the pastor had shared this story with the Benoits? Or any evidence that Benoit, that he was aware of this story of Elijah and the widow's son prior to searching for the term Elijah, right? He had to know about it beforehand. If he didn't know that particular story, then he wouldn't have known it would be there when he searched Elijah, right? So then during this interview, Pastor Dillard got out his Bible and reads to Detective Harper the 17th chapter of the first book of Kings. And Detective Harper has even included the 17th chapter of the first book of Kings here in his report. So let's see what that says. Because before we just looked at the Wikipedia page, now this is the direct quote from that part of the Bible. This is what Pastor Dillard read to Detective Harper during this interview from the Bible. It says, Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the foreigners of Gilead, said to Ahab, As Yahweh, the God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, there shall not be dew nor rain these years, but according to my word. And you can watch part 17 of my Benoit series to get a more in-depth explanation as to what this story of Elijah that's being explained here, like what it means. So the word of Yahweh came to Elijah, saying, Get you hence, and turn you eastward, and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, that is before the Jordan. It shall be that you shall drink of the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. So he went and did according to the word of Yahweh, for he went and lived by the brook Cherith, that is before the Jordan. The ravens brought him bread and flesh in the morning. What? And bread and flesh in the evening. And he drank of the brook. It happened after a while that the brook dried up, because there was no rain in the land. The word of Yahweh then came to him, saying, Arise, get you to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to sustain you. So he arose and went to Zarephath. And when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called to her and said, Please get me a little water in a vessel that I may drink. As she was going to get it, he called to her and said, "And please bring me a morsel of bread in your hand." And I'm right here now. The widow says to Elijah, "As Yahweh your God lives, I don't have a cake, but a handful of meal in the jar, and a little oil in the jar. And behold, I am gathering 2 sticks, that I may go in and bake it for me and my son, that we may eat it and die." And I can't help it. I don't think that I mentioned this in part 17 when I went through the story of Elijah, but that specific part, that the widow's going to bake bread so that she can eat it with her child and then die, sounds a little bit like food poisoning, huh? Just saying. You can check out my complete Benoit playlist. There's a link in the description box below if you want to watch previous videos to understand what I mean by that. And while you're down there, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you like what you see here and you appreciate the research that I'm putting into this, also in the description box you'll find a link to my Cash App, followed by a link to a video with very simple instructions for how to donate. Any contribution is greatly appreciated. Even a few dollars goes a long way. But getting back to the story of Elijah in Detective Harper's investigative summary, Elijah says to the widow, "Don't be afraid. Go and do as you have said, but make me of it a little cake first, and bring it forth to me, and afterward make for you and for your son. For thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, the jar of meal shall not empty, neither shall the jar of oil fail, until the day that Yahweh sends rain on the earth." So just a quick recap. Basically, Yahweh, God, sends Elijah to this town where he meets up with this widow who doesn't have enough food to feed herself and her son. So she doesn't have enough to feed Elijah. And Elijah tells her, "Look, if you feed me when I'm in need, God will make sure that you have enough to feed yourself and your son until he decides to end the drought and send the rains back to the earth." And in part 17 of my Benoit series, I went over this a little bit more in depth and explained some metaphorical connotations to this and how this could be viewed in other ways in like the modern sense of the time. And it's also really important to note that this story is just a small, tiny section of all of the instances of Elijah in the Bible. And this particular story is the only instance of Elijah resuscitating the deceased. It's not like Elijah is known for going all around through the Bible, bringing people back to life. So keep that in mind. So the widow went and did according to Elijah, which just means that she did what Elijah said, and fed him the last of her food. And she and he and her house ate for many days. The jar of meal didn't empty, neither did the jar of oil fail, according to the word of Yahweh, which he spoke by Elijah. So then after that, or like it says here, it happened after these things, and I'm right here now. It happened after these things that the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, fell sick, and his sickness was so sore that there was no breath left in him. She said to Elijah, "What have I to do with you, man of God? You have come to me to bring my sin to memory and to kill my son." Now again, a brief backstory here. The reason Elijah was there with the widow was to spread the word of God throughout Israel, to speak the word of good against evil. And the widow is saying basically, by coming here and by preaching the word of God, you made me recall all of the instances where I have sinned. And because now I'm aware that what I did was sinful, God as punishment has taken away my son. And again, in video number 17, part 17, you can see a more in-depth explanation to this. So then Elijah says to the widow, "Give me your son." And Elijah took the boy from her bosom and carried him up into the chamber where he abode and laid him on his own bed. He cried to Yahweh and said, "Yahweh, my God, have you also brought evil on the widow with whom I sojourn by killing her son?" He stretched himself on the child 3 times and cried to Yahweh and said, "Yahweh, my God, please let this child's soul come into him again." And Yahweh listened to the voice of Elijah, and the soul of the child came into him again, and he revived. Elijah took the child and brought him down out of the chamber into the house and delivered him to his mother. And Elijah said, "Behold, your son lives." The woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of Yahweh in your mouth is truth." So Pastor Dillard reads that passage of the Bible to Detective Harper. Remember, all of this that we're reading right now is in Detective Harper's investigative summary. And then it says that at that point, Pastor Dillard was advised of the internet search where Chris Benoit searched for Elijah. So up until now, the pastor wasn't even aware, according to this police report, the pastor wasn't even aware that Benoit had searched for Elijah. Pastor Dillard had only been asked by Detective Harper if there was anything about the story of Elijah that would be of any specific interest to his investigation into the Benoit crime. So when he was told about the internet search, Pastor Dillard stated he did not know for sure, but it may have been a way for Chris Benoit to say to God that if you are real, this is a way for you to show me so and to return life to his family. So, wow. I mean, go gadget arms for the reach of this pastor, am I right? I mean, seriously, of all the things he could have said, that's quite a stretch. But there it is. Then it goes on to additional property located. So that's all that's here with the interview of Pastor Dillard. Again, I'm just going to say, I think in a courtroom, if this evidence was presented, that this would not be admissible due to, number one, leading. Because as you can see here, Detective Harper is clearly leading Pastor Dillard, asking him to pick things from the story of Elijah that could be of interest in his investigation. And number two, hearsay, for all of the reasons that you can see explained by the graphic that's on the screen right now, especially this box, because it's very possible, whether he was aware of it or not, that the pastor tailored his response to Detective Harper's question to fit the details of the investigation. The point I'm trying to make is that the pastor has no way of knowing this. Unless, like I said multiple times, unless there's evidence that this particular story of Elijah resurrecting the widow's son had been a topic discussed during these spiritual guidance conversations, or any other proof that Benoit had direct knowledge of this particular story, any evidence that it would have been at the forefront of his memories and easy to recall during a moment of absolute chaos to make him want to do an internet search for it. That would have been, in my opinion, the only way this would have any relevancy in a court of law. But there had to have been some reason that he knew to search specifically for Elijah. Otherwise, I don't think that any of this holds any water as far as Chris Benoit trying to say to God, look, if you're real, prove it by returning my family to life. I think that's really a crazy reach. And coming from a pastor, I just feel like this is slightly inappropriate to go there, to take it to Crazyville, because to get there, you need to ignore a few things. First of all, you need to completely ignore the overarching story of Elijah being a messenger of good against evil, and the fact that Benoit would have needed to have an understanding of the story in order to be seeking those specific search results when just typing Elijah into the search engine. And you'd also have to assume that Benoit would even have the wherewithal to read this extensive wiki page in less than 3 minutes after committing this crime. And you'd also have to ignore that Benoit's last wrestling match was with an opponent named Elijah Burke. Could that have had something to do with the internet search? I don't know, because none of those things are discussed anywhere in these police files. So what do you think? Did Pastor Dillard overstep his bounds by suggesting this particular story to Detective Harper? Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. So then we come back here to Detective Harper's summary to the section titled Internet Postings. So Detective Harper says that during the investigation it was reported that Nancy Benoit's death was posted on the internet site Wikipedia.com and on a WWE blog prior to the bodies being found on June 25, 2007. Detective Josh Shelton was tasked with tracking down down the person or persons who made these claims. Detective Shelton prepared a separate report detailing his investigation of the Wikipedia.com and WWE internet posts. And we looked through Detective Shelton's report in part 16 of my Benoit series, and you can find a link to the complete playlist in the description box below. In summary, Detective Shelton learned that the report of Nancy Benoit's death on the Wikipedia.com site was actually a change to the original entry. The original entry advised that Chris Benoit missed the wrestling event due to a family emergency. The edited post advised Chris Benoit missed the event due to the death of his wife, Nancy. Wikipedia.com can be described as an online encyclopedia that is updated and edited by its online users. So what that means is that anybody can log into Wikipedia and change any entry to say whatever they want. And apparently somebody had done that prior to the date that the crime scene had been discovered on June 25th. They changed the Wikipedia page to say that Nancy Benoit, I really need to learn how to self-censor myself. It's going to take me a while to get used to doing that. But that Nancy Benoit had passed prior to the crime scene being discovered. Detective Shelton was able to obtain the IP address for the Wikipedia.com user that edited the information on Chris Benoit's Wikipedia page. Detective Shelton learned that the same Wikipedia.com user had made more edits to the same Wikipedia.com page in which he expressed remorse for the previous edit. Detective Shelton was able to identify the Wikipedia.com user Matthew Greenberg, who coincidentally lives in Stamford, Connecticut, the home city for World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE. And he doesn't just live in the same city. This guy, Matthew Greenberg, literally lives right down the street from WWE main headquarters. You can see here, it's less than a 1-minute drive, a half a mile in distance, and it'll cost you 10 cents in fuel to get there. But again, all of this is covered more in depth in part 16 of my series. So at least the police are acknowledging it here, that it's quite a coincidence that he lives in Stamford, Connecticut. This report goes on to say that in the apology, which I think by apology it means this, the extra edits that he had done to the Wikipedia page in which he expresses remorse for that previous edit. So in the apology, Matthew Greenberg stated his speculation as to why Chris Benoit missed the wrestling event on Saturday, June 23rd, 2007 was a terrible coincidence. Matthew Greenberg was interviewed by detectives with the City of Stamford Police Department. So they left all questioning and interrogation of Matthew Greenberg to the City of Stamford Police, who may or may not have some sort of bias in favor of WWE. And the Stamford detectives advised they believed Matthew Greenberg was simply speculating in the post and was, in their words, harmless. This goes on to say that in reference to a separate WWE blog posting, Detective Shelton learned the initial post was made on June 24th, 2007 at 8:41 p.m. And now this is a separate incident from the Wikipedia Benoit page entry. This is on the WWE blog. It says that the initial post about the passing of Nancy was made on June 24th, 2007 at 8:41 p.m. The initial blogger that made the post used the name The Illusionist, or as it says here, Gob the Illusionist, and was later identified as Sheldon Chandler of Orlando, Florida. And a transcription of the blog was provided by WWE. And we went through all of that. You can see all of that in part 16 of my Benoit series. The one about the chat room. But Detective Harper's report here goes on to say that Detective Shelton was able to speak with Sheldon Chandler, who advised he believed he recalled seeing the information in another chat room, but couldn't recall where. And Sheldon Chandler admitted that there was a great deal of speculation in his posting and wrote the following email in explanation. And I'm not going to read through all of this because this is exactly the same thing that I read through in Detective Shelton's summary, and you can see that in that same previous video I keep talking about, part 16, the chat rooms. It's exactly the same thing, word for word. Nothing tucked in there that was different from Detective Shelton's summary in his copy of this. And then Detective Harper concludes this section of his report by stating that Detective Shelton also received information that a popular wrestling reporter, Dave Meltzer, reported that Chris Benoit had K'd Nancy prior to an official release of information. In a conversation with Meltzer, Detective Shelton was told that Meltzer's name is frequently used as a reference since he is a popular writer in the industry, and that at no time did he know about the crime prior to our response to the home. Detective Shelton was unable to find any evidence that Meltzer reported or was aware of the passings prior to the biddies being located. And that is the end of the internet postings part. From here, we're going to go into the interrogation of this Matthew Greenberg. So in the next part, I'm going to do like a reaction type video with that. So don't forget to like and share this with anyone you think might be interested. Subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that little bell while you're down there so you get notified for future videos. And don't forget, there is a link in the description box to my Cash App if you would like to make a contribution to the channel. And as always, I thank you so much for watching. This has been Amte at Purple Sky 11, and I hope you have a great day. Bye!